Story 1. I was one of about 6 people working at a computer repair shop. My boss said that anyone who passed the Computing Technology Industry Association A+ certification test would receive a $1 per hour raise. 6 people took the test, 5 passed, and I had the highest score. My boss refused to give me the raise, saying I was a kid who did not need the money and would buy toys with it. I was about to be a senior in high school and was 17 years old. I quit immediately and went to work for his competitor for $2 per hour more than he had been paying me. Story 2. I was a shift lead in a kitchen where none of the management knew anything about the back of house. I ran the grill, sauté station, expediter station, and oven solo during every peak shift. I ordered deliveries, prepped all week for weekend brunch, wrote kitchen schedules, coordinated cleaning projects, contacted vendors for repairs, and generally ran the kitchen's day-to-day operations. I was given the keys and started opening 6 days a week. I worked over 55 hours and loved it. I expanded our brunch service to include Fridays as well as Saturday and Sunday, and I came up with an early week menu to use up leftover brunch items and minimize waste. I helped grow weekly sales from $40,000 to $45,000 to $75,000 to $80,000 over 3 years. I started having issues with closing management on shifts where I was not present. I would arrive at 6 a.m. to open and find the restaurant a mess and prep and stocking incomplete. I talked to the staff and tried to get them to help, but I had no support or follow-through from the managers. This went on for weeks. One week I was in at 5 a.m. for Friday brunch prep. I was prepping sheets of bacon and went to the back to pull the biscuits I had prepared the day before. I had left them on a speed rack, but I found them stacked on top of each other on a shelf. The weight of the trays had smashed every biscuit into single sheets of dough on the lower trays. The speed rack also held dressings and cold items from the line that had been closed the night before. I had completed about 90% of the brunch prep by the time the opening manager arrived at 8:30 a.m. We opened at 9 a.m. I told her what was left to set up the line. She asked why I was telling her. I laid the sheets of dough in front of her, dropped my keys on top, and walked out. They called me nearly 50 times that day and sent dozens of texts. I did not respond to any of them. A few days later, the store owner called and asked who he needed to fire to get me back. I told him I would pass and found another job within a day. A little over a year later, the restaurant shut down and was demolished to turn the space into a parking garage. Story 3. Over a decade ago, I worked at Tim Hortons. I had been there 6 years on the overnight shift, from 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. We were always understaffed, usually just 2 people, one in the back and one at the front of house. It was slower than during the day, but there were a few rushes when nearby places closed. They rehired a guy who had previously been fired about 4 times for not showing up. He was on the schedule with me one Sunday. There was a 20 dozen donut order, and that was the day the freezer truck arrived, which I put away. I remember thinking that if he did not show up, I would probably just go home. Needless to say, he did not show up. Managers were not answering either. I stayed for a few hours, futilely trying to get everything done. I closed the front and the drive-thru, intending to work a few hours to at least have the order ready by 6 a.m. Then a switch flipped. I realized I would not be able to take any break. I would have to put away the freezer delivery that arrived at 5 a.m., the busiest time, and handle everything on my own. The people who showed up in the morning would complain about tasks I had not completed. I would probably get written up again for some trivial reason, and all this for about $10.50 an hour. I paused and asked myself, how long do I want to work here? At that moment, a bunch of drunk kids were knocking on the door, apparently confused why the lights were off and the door locked. I decided 6 years was enough and went home. Story 4. Dillard's told me to clock out and work all night because the regional manager was coming to inspect the store. They wanted me to work 8 hours moving heavy items for free. I quit on the spot. They told me I was not a team player. I asked the manager whether he would pay me for the time I would be working off the clock. He said no. I asked why I should work without getting paid, and he gave a blank stare. Story 5. At an old sales job, I closed a big deal and was expecting a sizable commission check. A week or so later, I learned the client was not mine, so the check would go to the correct sales representative. The correct sales representative happened to be related to the boss, so they received the commission without ever lifting a finger. I left that day. Story 6: Verbal abuse from my boss. I am an extremely patient person, but when every word they say is berating and condescending, nothing is worth enduring and there is no reason to stay longer than necessary. Story 7: My dad had stage 4 lymphoma. We couldn't have our phones on the floor unless we filled out some paperwork with human resources for emergencies. I asked my supervisor for the paperwork and he said, "Don't worry about it." When his boss visited, he saw my phone and asked me about it, so I told the truth. My supervisor was furious. A couple of weeks later, I was called into the human resources office. My sister called to tell me my dad had died. My supervisor wasn't there, but I left early. I took bereavement leave and came back to work. My coworker pulled me aside to tell me my supervisor had accused me of lying about my dad having cancer and dying to the entire team while I was gone. I hugged her and left. Edit. This was almost 13 years ago. I was 20 and out on my own for the first time. He was probably around 40 and large. There was no way I could have decked him. Wherever he is, fuck you, Casey. Story 8. My father died right before Christmas. I had already scheduled a week off for family travel. Human Resources said I could add 3 more days for funeral services so we could have it after the holiday. When I returned, Human Resources called. The woman apologized and asked if my father had actually died. I told her yes. She apologized again and said she did not need anything else. Then the office manager called me in and told me my boss had been telling people she thought I was faking it to get more time off. My boss was generally horrible and relied on me to do the majority of her work, which led her to create the story about my father not actually dying because she hoped I would be called back early from my trip. I had been interviewing at another company and received an offer the day I returned. I called from my desk to accept the offer, then packed my things and left. Story 9. My boss was promoted, so my manager became my new boss. My new boss wrote me up, and I had to speak with Human Resources for arriving an hour late to an off-site vendor meeting. The hour was just a scheduled breakfast I did not want to eat, and I had stayed up late working on numbers for the business that they assigned to me at 8 p.m. After a big work dinner when everyone else went to the bar. My former boss, who is now my boss's boss, arrived 3 hours late with 2 coworkers, interrupting the meeting to brag that one had passed out in the hotel lobby. Another had drunkenly handed the hotel staff his key card and asked them to find his room, and the third never made it out of the back seat of the car. They never used the data I stayed up half the night collecting. Story 10. I once worked as a landscaper. During a slow month, some of us were asked to go to the boss's brother's property to help out, which was fine. My boss asked me to pick him up in the morning and drive him out there. The straw that broke the camel's back came when I filled some buckets with water. Although I turned off the tap, it still dripped. My boss noticed and had a complete meltdown. He threatened to harm whoever had left it dripping, even though he did not know who it was. I dropped my tools, told him to shove his threats, and left, abandoning him in the middle of nowhere. Story 11. I did everything they wanted. I jumped on a plane to another site on 1 day's notice and ended up working 16 days straight before coming back. I took a work-from-home customer service role I did not really want just to help out on a temporary basis. We were told that half the team could have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day off and the other half could have Christmas Day and Boxing Day except me. I could have only Christmas Day. I signed out of the virtual private network, blocked my manager's calls, packed my laptop in a box, and mailed it to head office with my resignation letter inside. Story 12. I requested that weekend off 5 months in advance. That week arrived and I was on the bar schedule. I called and said I could not work because someone was coming from across the country to stay with me and I had requested the time off 5 months earlier. The manager replied that I had submitted a request for time off and that it was only a request. Although I was seething with anger, I said okay and hung up. On the day of the shift, I waited until 15 minutes before it started and left a message thanking them for the opportunity to cover everyone else's shifts for 3 years, but saying I would never work there again. I still joke with my friend that I quit my job for her. Story 13. I used to work at the International House of Pancakes part-time while I was in high school. They scheduled me during school hours and called when I did not show up. I dropped off their orders during the rush and left. Story 14. I was working at Sears part-time for the Christmas season. They never trained me. When my supervisor came in and discovered I was working alone, he ran out before anyone could ask him to help. Another supervisor had a nervous breakdown. While crying, he said he wanted to punch the manager, but he was a felon and needed the job. I became tired of the situation because I was literally working only for Christmas money. They found me at my other job and asked me to come back because I had learned how to do the work without training. I said no, and they told me I would never be able to work for Sears or Kmart again. Shiver me timbers. Story 15. When I complained about being on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and not being paid for it, they put me in with human resources to discuss my performance. I walked out 2 weeks before Christmas. Story 16. I have only quit one job. It was in high school when I worked at a grocery store. I quit after I was scheduled as the only person to work a Saturday night. Literally, there was no janitor, manager, bagger, or anyone else. I was 16 or 17 and lived in a small town, but being the only person working the entire store was absurd. I never went back. Story 17. They never gave me the raise they promised 3 months earlier. Then a manager tried to criticize me for not doing something that was not even my responsibility. I cursed him and then cursed the plant manager during our meeting, and I left. About 3 days later, the plant manager called and asked why I had not been to work. He thought I had just been venting and had left for the day. I told him, I fucking quit. Not sure how that was not clear. Story 18. My boss continuously berated my performance. I accepted a similar position elsewhere. My new job was scheduled to start in a couple of weeks, and I was waiting to speak with my boss to give him 2 weeks' notice. When he began criticizing me again, I handed him the building keys and walked out. Story 19. An hour before my shift, I was called and told to come in immediately because the manager had not scheduled enough staff. I reminded her I needed to take the bus, and she told me to just take a cab, so I took a cab. When I arrived, she said I should have made sure she scheduled correctly. She then told me I would be opening the next morning even though I was closing the kitchen that night. I closed and did not open the next morning. My apron and key were on the counter for her when she went to work. Story 20. Fast food job as a teenager. I worked the manager position on weekend overnight shifts for just over minimum wage. The manager who was supposed to relieve me on Saturday and Sunday mornings was often late. One morning my car would not start and I needed a friend to drive me, so I called to warn that I might be a few minutes late. She answered and started yelling at me. I scrambled and arrived 5 minutes late. If she had made a snide remark or let it go, we probably would have been fine, but she continued to berate me and I snapped. I yelled back that I was overworked and underappreciated, acting as a manager without the title or pay, and I reminded her that she was often hours late to relieve me on weekends. I could not leave because I was the manager on duty until she arrived, so I told her I quit. I had been thinking about leaving already. I worked primarily to afford my car, which was failing, and my schoolwork was suffering. The other man scheduled to work nights with me witnessed the exchange and quit on the spot. Story 21. They took my elderly coworker to the back and unceremoniously fired him. He had a disability when he was hired, but after a few years a new manager started assigning him tasks he could not do and then complained to the new owners. I walked out with him and I am proud of that decision. He said it made him feel like he mattered. The business closed 6 months later. It has been 7 years, and thinking about that day and those smug, heartless managers still makes me angry. Story 22. I heard my boss talking about my mother, who did not work for the company, on the phone with human resources while at work. She said my mother was a nut job and lied about how she had planned to replace me for the last few weeks. She had become deeply paranoid. Earlier that week, she had learned I was looking for a second job closer to home, which led to a long talk in which I repeatedly reassured her I had no plans to quit. Her assumption that I would leave made her turn on me after 6 years of working together. including multiple major work events such as coronavirus disease 2019. She went from begging me not to leave to telling human resources the next day that she had planned to fire me for weeks. But it was what she said about my mother during that same call that broke the camel's back. My mother was in deep grief at the time after finding her boyfriend dead on the floor on her birthday, and I had confided in my boss that I was spending a lot of energy trying to help my mother and that it was causing me stress. As soon as I heard her say that, I packed up my desk, walked over to human resources, and told them everything I had heard. I quit when they said they did not have any other positions open elsewhere in the company and that they would not take action against my boss. Story 23. My first job was as a dishwasher, and the owners were cheap pricks. I was yelled at for emptying a metal container that had a serving or two of marinara sauce left at the bottom at the end of the night because I was supposed to pour it back into the container for later use. One of the owners then started throwing other food away from the fridge, saying, "Well, we might as well not save anything." I quit on the spot. Story 24. I requested and was approved for paid time off so I could get dental surgery. On the morning of the surgery, I received a message from my boss asking me to come to work as soon as possible. I explained that the surgery was in about 30 minutes. He told me I had to be there that afternoon. I came in after surgery. I could not speak and I was in severe pain. The reason was that his boss was present and she asked if I was available. When she saw me and my condition, she apologized and had a very loud conversation with him. She had been one of my regular customers at my previous employer in food service. A few days later, he reprimanded me about my lack of professionalism and other general management issues. I ended the call, put my keys in the safe, emailed his boss, and left. He was fired about a week later, but that was not enough to get me to return. Story 25. The new boss completely changed hours and expectations without notice or consultation with employees. I bore the worst of it, and when I stood up for myself, I was met with crocodile tears and outright insults. After 3 months of misery, I left following one final scathing insult. I regret my lack of professionalism, but I do not regret leaving the job. Story 26. I asked for a filing cabinet for 6 months and was told there was no money in the budget. I found one for free, but there was no time to pick it up. Then they bought a brand new truck for another supervisor. Story 27. In early 2022, after being off work for several weeks to care for an injured loved one and to recover from coronavirus disease 2019, I received an unexpected email one night saying I had been placed back on the schedule. I had a full-scale panic attack. Hours later, after I finally calmed down, I realized that during the weeks I had been off, I no longer felt the need to drink every night and my heart palpitations had disappeared. I started applying for new jobs the next day and had a new position within a few weeks. On the day I started the new job, I received a letter from my old employer saying that I had not yet officially quit. It turned out my leave of absence had never been approved. They waited almost 4 months to tell me. The letter said that if I did not report to work on March 31st, I would be considered to have quit my job. It was late on March 29th when I received the notice. Story 28. This employee kept bragging that she never washed her hands, yet upper management continued to promote her. I worked in the factory that made every donut for Dunkin' in Michigan, and she literally bragged about not washing her hands. Do not purchase any product from Dunkin' in Michigan. If you order anything from Dunkin' in Michigan that has frosting or sprinkles on it, you may be touching food handled by someone who refuses to wash their hands and who reacts angrily when confronted. I know this sounds dramatic, but it is true. Story 29. After 18 years in retail, I took a vacation to the beach. It had been an incredibly tough year. My husband died and I became a widow. I had trouble with my children, financial problems, and a boss who seemed to hate me. I suddenly had many more demands on my time. My workplace was completely unwilling to be flexible about these new constraints, so I finally wrote a schedule and took 3 days to myself. I relaxed and realized how good it was to be far away. The day I was supposed to pack and head home, I extended our stay and never went back. They called repeatedly, texted, and tried to get a hold of me, but I did not care. I stayed away, and it felt like a weight had been lifted. I still have nightmares about that place, but at least I wake up knowing I never have to go there again. Story 30. Working in retail, you take abuse from customers and management. It builds up. I'm not sure there was a final straw, but one day I went to lunch and never came back. Story 31. They disqualified me from a job I had built from the bottom up, a position created explicitly for me over a baseless complaint, and they were going to send me to an overnight shift packing boxes for 15% less pay. I interviewed for a job closer to home that paid 30% more the following week. I quit the day after I used all my vacation hours without notice. I had the biggest smile of my life. Then I learned that their auditor came in 3 months after I left and discovered that I had done a great deal to save the company money and to keep them in compliance with the Occupational Safety and Health Administration. Oddly enough, they were about 80 days behind on many items. They are hiring for my vacancy right now. Fuck them. Story 32. The manager was always kind of mean. He threw pots and pans and finished orders that he did not consider worthy of the customer. He dragged a customer out of the restaurant while she was having a panic attack because he checked her identification well into her meal, even though she had already been checked for her first drink. I worked there for 2 years. I was 22. Many of the people I worked with in the afternoons were still in high school. I was on the grill when he started screaming at a 16-year-old girl, telling her to man the fryers. She had no prior experience. It was a Saturday night. He started screaming at her because she was slightly backed up, but she was doing extremely well considering it was her first time. She had tears in her eyes before he shoved her to the side and took over. The kitchen went silent. Felt like time stopped. I don't know. We all walked out together. Nobody said anything. She left first, then the dishwasher, then me and 2 other coworkers. The manager was cursing, and customers watched us leave. The servers were stressed but understood. Felt like sweet relief. Story 33. The vice president of the company took me aside and showed me how my maintenance skills had saved the company about $15,000 in my first year there. I volunteered to serve as the department's safety officer as soon as I arrived, and I always took the undesirable jobs nobody wanted. I asked for a raise, but I got the runaround and was told I wasn't worth it. I gave 1 week's notice and left. Now I'm making more than twice as much happier, and appreciated for my work while working fewer hours. I often hope that place goes out of business. Even an inexperienced person could have managed operations better than that company's leadership. Story 34. I was scheduled for 12 hours per week after being hired full-time, but I never received those hours. Story 35. My brother had just died. It would have been the first Christmas without him, and I was expected to work because they said, "It is not like you have kids." Story 36. I was publicly reprimanded by the abusive store manager for clocking in 2 minutes late. I waited for a busy shift when only he and I were scheduled. Then I called him 10 minutes after my shift started to tell him I quit. He threatened to kill me. Story 37. My manager threatened to punch me in the face for wearing dress shoes because he thought I was interviewing for another job, which I was not. On the same day, a customer threatened to kill me. Story 38. I had approved paid time off months in advance for a week-long getaway with my partner that was approved by my former manager. A new manager replaced the old manager 3 months before my scheduled time off. A week and a half before the trip, the new manager asked about it in the system. I said it was time off already approved by the previous manager. The new manager told me I needed to find someone to cover my shifts, as if it was my responsibility rather than the manager's to ensure the store was covered. He even told me to call other stores to find coverage when we were short-staffed. At that point, I decided I was done. Fortunately, I was not in a dire financial situation and did not need the job. I left a 1-week notice printed on his desk, then decided not to come in for my remaining scheduled shifts. Story 39. At a retail job, I was not in a good place mentally and was signed off work and referred to a crisis team. When I returned, my manager apologized and said she had lost her temper because it was a full moon that night. Story 40. In college, I worked for a landscaper, mostly mowing. It was a one-man operation but flexible. We drove around in a 1960s 2.5-ton General Motors truck that had flaky paint. One day I called before work and said I was really sick and would rather stay home. He begged me to come in, saying we had a lot to do that day. I came in feeling awful. When I arrived, he had me sand the decades-long neglected running boards on the truck for 40 minutes. I walked into his house to say I was going home because I felt terrible, and he was sitting there getting high. Every morning he assigned me a half hour of pointless busy work in the driveway so he could get stoned before we went out to work. I left and did not go back. Story 41. I was promoted from backroom to entertainment specialist at Target. It came with a raise to $10.25 per hour. It was great. Then the electronics specialist quit, and I took over his duties as well as my own. We were shorthanded on floor staff, so I also covered toys, sporting goods, automotive, travel, health and beauty aids, and baby hardlines. I set end caps, did price changes and clearance, and pulled and stocked merchandise. On top of my regular duties, Tuesdays were street date, which meant moving every movie, compact disc, and book one spot toward the back. Then came the Xbox 360, PlayStation 3, and Wii launches and digital television. After a couple of years working 60 hours a week, I applied for an open team lead position. I thought my work ethic was second to none. I had more Target RED card accounts than anyone else in the district, and I had been recognized as a top seller of electronics in our region. I was told I was not qualified because I did not have a degree. I said screw it and walked. I left them with no one to cover the back half of the store. I heard it was a mess for a while after. That was mid-2008. I was not following the news and did not realize we were in the midst of the Great Recession. I assumed I would walk out and find another job paying more. It was a rough wake-up call. Making rent the next few months was tough. I picked up random jobs and scoured Craigslist listings all night. People always asked why I stayed at my last job for 14 years. I think the post-traumatic stress from my previous career change kept me in a stable position. Story 42. I was first scheduled outside my availability after telling them twice and leaving a note for my supervisor, who did not see it until it was too late. I had coverage for every day except one. When I told my supervisor I would be 2 hours late because I worked 2 jobs, I was told I had to be there or it would be considered a no-call, no-show. A coworker at my second job, after I asked repeatedly, switched shifts so I could arrive on time. Because I was scheduled outside my availability, I worked from 6 a.m. to 1 a.m. for the next 3 days. When I asked if I could leave at midnight instead of 1 a.m., I was told that by asking I had volunteered to stay until 4 a.m. to help check the truck in. I clocked out for lunch and went home. I do not regret it. Story 43. The company had lied about many aspects of the job, but the final straw was being forced to work in a windowless room that constantly smelled awful because of a nearby kitchen exhaust. I am still amazed they got away with that. They interviewed me on the 3rd floor of a glass building that was actually a rented space used to lure people in. I received an offer for my dream job and left immediately. Story 44. New management started taking my commissions and repeatedly tried to renege on our agreed contract and pay. The final straw was when they took money from the tip jar, claiming tips were not for employees but only for the boss. Story 45. They did many underhanded things to other employees, so it was no surprise when they came for me. I had an odd feeling beforehand. The morning I realized it was happening, I came in early and emptied my workspace. I was a cook and had brought in a lot of my own things. They wrote me up that morning, and I walked straight out the door and drove away. When I got home, I logged into our ordering system and deleted everything I had created to make weekly ordering easier. I also took all the menus I had made. Felt very satisfying. Story 46. I was on call 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, without pay and with 0 days off. Fuck Circle K. Story 47. One of my bosses hired his friend's kid. The kid acted like a jerk because he believed he was unfireable due to the relationship. I grew tired of his behavior and gave him a taste of his own medicine. He immediately told his father, who told my boss, who then confronted me. I had been at the company about 5 years, had generated a lot of revenue, and was set to replace my direct supervisor that year. My boss publicly reprimanded me in front of the kid to humiliate me. so I quit on the spot and moved to a direct competitor. The hired kid left a month later, leaving them with only the aging supervisor and the owner. It took me a year to reach a top position at the new company, where I essentially run my own area. I am still asked to come back, but I will never return. Companies should not put a hired friend's child above a veteran employee because of personal relationships. Story 48. I started training a new employee. He severely beat me and put me in the hospital. I was a teenager at the time. He had gotten the job a day after being released from jail. He said, "I don't take orders from some dumb kid," then punched me in the head. I woke up in the hospital with broken ribs, a broken leg, 3 fingers broken on my left hand and 1 on my right hand. I had various other injuries from after he knocked me out. My employer called to ask if I was going to be late in the morning. I told them I was in the hospital with a broken leg. They said, "You have crutches, right? Be there at 7 a.m." I said no, I quit. I hung up and blocked his contact. I received a bunch of nasty pages from him before I changed my number. I showed the police the messages and gave them access to my voicemail. They told me it was best if I never went back there. I never did. I ended up getting a nice check in the mail from the company for how badly things went. Took years to figure out. As far as I know, the man was never caught. He just fled on foot, cursing about that kid who ruined his life. I imagine there is some angry person out there thinking about how he was going to get me. I am not worried. It has been over 30 years. Story 49. I worked a contract writing job at a technology company right after college. I thought that was how you started, so I worked very hard writing copy all day for these idiotic scripts. One day the boss came up to the 5 of us and said, "Yeah, we usually only keep 1 of you. I wonder who it will be." That moment showed how little they valued my and my coworkers' creativity, and how little they valued me. I ended up deleting my browser history, closing my laptop, and walking out. The biggest mistake was that I had to bring the key fob back the next week. I had forgotten to take it off, so I sneaked back into the office at 6 a.m. because I knew it would just be the janitorial staff. Story 50. I was a bartender in the catering department of a well-known hotel franchise. My manager, whom I wrongly thought was a friend, would pull me off my cash bar shifts to serve food in the banquet rooms. When I was hired, I told them that I wanted to bartend and set up rooms for functions. That classification was called a porter. Servers were a different job classification. These catering shifts were 12 to 14 hours long, so if I was going to work those hours, I wanted to make money, cash in hand. Everyone knew this and assumed I would go along with whatever they wanted. My manager pulled me off the bar a few too many times, so we had a conversation. She said it was out of her hands and she had to do what she had to do. I was also gifted a case of beer from a function organizer for a great night, and the hotel said I was not allowed to accept gifts. My manager took the beer and put it into the alcohol inventory to sell for extra money. That, combined with being taken off my cash bars regularly, made me very angry. I waited until they had an open bar for 300 lawyers, open bar meaning all alcohol was free for the whole function, and 10 minutes before my shift started I quit on the spot. She called me and said it was unprofessional and that I would have a hard time getting a job as good as that one. She blocked me on Facebook, and whenever I see her to this day, she looks down and ignores me. The most satisfying part is that about 4 months after quitting, I got a job that paid double. I had a training session at that same hotel and got to walk past her and smile. I hope that orange gremlin was happy she messed me over. I was lucky she did. Now I own a house and am set for the rest of my life. It's odd the way things happen. Story 51. Over the course of a year, several people quit and were not replaced. My boss had always been unpleasant, and things were getting worse. I was doing the work of 4 people and was verbally abused every day. One employee took a week of bereavement leave after her brother's sudden death, and my boss accused her of exploiting the system and demanded she return to work after 3 days. We all had an exit strategy by that point, but I was trying to hold out a few more months to save extra money. Another coworker, Jane, gave her 2 weeks' notice. My boss had never liked her personally and decided this was an occasion to celebrate. She said to me, "Aren't you excited? Jane is leaving." We should have a party. I was not excited. Jane was the most reliable employee and could be counted on to show up for every shift. She had worked there, underpaid and underappreciated, coming in on weekends and holidays, for 7 years. Yes, she had a nasty mouth, a coarse attitude, and poor hygiene. I did not much care for her either, but she showed up and did her work. Because she was leaving, it meant I would have to shoulder her duties until we found someone else. It was not a cause for celebration. I had planned to finish the summer and then give my 2 weeks' notice. One morning I found my boss had scrawled a note on the bookkeeper's desk that read Jane's last day. Woohoo. That was the straw that broke everything. I quickly typed a resignation letter, taped my key to it, and walked out the door after apologizing to the one remaining employee on staff. Story 52. I was a shift supervisor at Wendy's. One night, a customer ordered an apple pecan salad after we had sold our last pre-made one. I asked an employee to gather ingredients from the walk-in refrigerator, specifically a bag of pre-chopped apples. He brought me 2 bags. One bag contained browned apples and had an expired date label. The other looked fresh and was not expired. I thanked him, took the fresh one, and instructed him to dispose of the expired bag. He refused because he was afraid my boss would find out it was him and fire him. I told him, "She can't fire you for doing what I told you to do, especially if it's the right thing to do." The next day, I got a call from an underage employee asking for a ride to work. When I picked him up, I realized he wasn't on the schedule and asked why he was coming in. He explained that the boss had asked him to sub for someone she had fired. We arrived at work. I went straight to the office to check the schedule and saw that she had crossed out the name of the employee who threw out the apples. I asked my boss why his name was crossed off the schedule, and she said he was wasting perfectly good food. I told her I had told him to throw it away because it was brown and the stamp date was expired. She yelled that it was only a few days past the date and still fine. I explained that it is illegal to sell food beyond its expiration date, but if she wanted to eat it herself, she was welcome to get it out of the dumpster. She said she had retrieved it from the dumpster and made salads with it. Then she yelled, "You don't throw away milk just because the expiration date has passed without sniffing it first." I replied, "First of all, the apples were brown. Second, I absolutely will throw out expired milk without sniffing it, because spoiled milk smells awful, and I don't want to ruin my appetite while I'm serving myself a meal." She then threatened to fire me, and I told her she should, because I was the one who instructed the employee to dispose of expired food and I would do it again. She admitted it was an empty threat because she couldn't afford to fire me, so I told her I was quitting. She asked, "Right now?" I said, "No, I'm giving my 2-week notice, but I start my 2-week vacation tomorrow, so tonight is my last shift." Later that night, I called the fired employee, apologized for getting him fired, and bragged that I had quit in solidarity. When my 2-week vacation was up, I had to work 1 more week to be paid for it because I needed 1 more week to reach a full year of work. During that final week, I had an exit interview with the district manager. I explained why I quit and spilled the beans on a bunch of other things the boss did wrong. I also suggested they get the security camera system fixed without telling the manager because the manager on shift was consistently putting money in the register, handing food out the window without ringing it up, then counting the drawer and pocketing the excess cash, which is against policy. During my next shift, a couple of technicians from corporate showed up to fix the security camera digital video recorder, but left as soon as they opened the closet and saw we had a video home system. They couldn't just fix it. They needed to replace it. They were very confused why we had a video home system in such a new store. I told them the rumor was that the manager had swapped it with a system from her house so she could get away with it. The district manager asked me to work at a store closer to my house for 1 month because the other store's managers were overdue for vacation and they did not have enough managers to cover shifts. When I started at the other Wendy's, I explained to the general manager why I had quit and transferred, and that I would quit with no notice if he overruled my decisions on food safety. He agreed. I worked there for almost a month and never had a shift where I was the only manager on duty, which either meant they did have enough managers to take vacations or they weren't taking any vacations. One day, an employee grabbed a bag of frozen chicken out of a freezer, unaware that the bag was already open, and dumped the whole bag on the floor right in front of the general manager and me. The employee looked at us both, shrugged, and asked, 5-second rule? I replied, no. The 5-second rule only applies if your only concern is bacterial contamination that can be killed by cooking, but we clean the floors with chemicals that cannot be cooked off. If you serve that chicken to customers, you will poison them. The employee looked to the general manager for confirmation, but the general manager said, he's right, but that's a whole lot of money. Pick it up and serve it. I walked out while saying loud enough for customers to hear, good luck with the food poisoning lawsuits. Story 53. I managed a department in a healthcare setting by myself for almost 4 months during the coronavirus disease 2019 pandemic. I was completely stressed out. I would cry driving home. I struggled to be kind to my family because of the stress. I could not sleep. My eating disorder returned with full force. I was even thinking about taking a grippy sock vacation. One Tuesday, a coworker tried to push some of her duties onto my already overloaded daily schedule. She spent more time on smoke breaks than doing her job, and she earned 3 times what I did. I drove home and told my partner that I hated my job. He told me to quit. The next day, I showed up at 7:30 in flip-flops, wearing pajamas and with my hair in a messy bun. I told the receptionist I was just coming in to drop off my office keys and computer. My boss was arriving as I left. He asked if I was okay, looking concerned. I told him I had never felt better and walked out. Best decision ever. Story 54. When someone gave notice, they made up a fake reason that he had to leave immediately, forced him to pack up his desk in front of everyone, and escorted him to the door. I resigned by email and never returned. Story 55. My first job was in retail. My dog was dying, so I had to have him put down. I called in to say I could not make it because I was putting my dog down. The manager responded, seriously? It is just a dog. I told them I would not come in. At my next shift, several coworkers told me he had been bad-mouthing me all shift, saying, it is just a dog. Who cares? Later, a different manager asked me about covering someone else's shift and said, or are you going to say no since you do not seem to want to work? Because I had called in. I was furious. The last straw came when I was accepted to law school and wanted to keep working until I left in about 5 months. My manager said no. They did not want me to leave, so I could not keep working until I left. I quit on the spot and left. No regrets. Story 56. After a stressful year of late nights and extra work, including all the tasks my manager did not feel like doing, we were informed by the chief executive officer that the company had suffered major losses and we would not be getting bonuses or raises that year. This was especially hard because we were in a recession and barely scraping by. Apparently no one at headquarters told my manager to keep quiet, because on Monday morning he arrived in a brand new Porsche and bragged about his massive bonus. Story 57. Way back in high school, I worked part-time at a grocery store a few days a week after school and on weekends. The place was a dump. The manager would want to leave and tell us to stop cleaning. I saw the butcher come out of the restroom twice, not wash his hands, and then go back to cutting meat without gloves. I had to pay union dues as a kid working barely any hours. I told my boss twice that I would not be available to work on Mother's Day. At the beginning of the week, I was not on the schedule. I checked the day before and noticed a bunch of erased marks for the next day with my name written over them for Mother's Day. I told the manager, and he said I had never said I was not working and that I had always been scheduled that day. I said I could see the erased marks with my name on top of them. He accused me of lying. I said, okay, see you tomorrow, and never went back. Story 58. I was hired as the public address announcer, league manager, and event coordinator for an ice rink. On the 4th day, while I was planning events, they said there was not enough for me to do and asked me to clean the restroom. I declined because another staff member was responsible for that. The owner became upset, and I left, saying this was not the job they had described to me. Story 59. I was hired as a salesperson with a promise of a management position. When I started, I noticed 2 things. Every customer who came in was already assigned to another salesperson, and many coworkers claimed they had also been promised management. One morning, a customer came to pick up an order and was clearly another salesperson's client. I asked that salesperson for help. He was with a customer and asked me to assist. I could not locate the order. The other salesperson refused to help because he wanted to keep working with his new customer, and no one else assisted. The customer left understandably angry. Later, I finally got a new customer planning to spend about $4,000. We discovered some sale items seemed mispriced and the customer left. The general manager yelled at me. I went to lunch and did not return. Story 60. I was working the night audit shift at a hotel and was going into my 5th year. Coronavirus disease 2019 restrictions had just eased at the start of the year, and I was able to return to work after almost a year off. It was not too bad, but I was passed over for manager, supervisor, and daytime office positions. A new front office manager started. A part-time night auditor quit about a month after I returned. I was repeatedly told the new manager would take the part-time day shifts so I could have an actual day off. I stuck it out for 4 months and was losing my mind. One night, I was running very late and decided to quit. I called the security guard and told him to meet me at the front desk because I was going to count my bank, drop it, and leave. I never looked back. It was a complete change. I now do electrical work on a normal schedule. Story 61. I got a write-up. I was a server at the time. I told my managers I was going to a teaching interview a few hours out of town. I had graduated and was looking for my first full-time teaching position. This was about 10 years ago. They put me on the schedule as on call for that interview day. I reminded them I would not be able to show, and they told me not to worry. When someone called in, they said I had to come. I reminded them I had a teaching interview several hours away and would not make it. They said okay, wished me luck, and got off the phone. I came into work the next day, and the restaurant owners told the managers to write me up for not being available. I asked if the server who called off was getting a write-up, and they said no. I said, so someone can call off with the sniffles and there is no consequence, but I am literally trying to better myself and gave you advance notice and I am the one getting the write-up? The managers looked at each other and said, basically, I signed it. They said they did not agree and tried to fight it. I believed them. They were not the type of managers to treat people unfairly. One of them said, I thought for sure you would quit over this. I said I am. He asked when. I said he would know when I did. I got a teaching job a couple of weeks later and did not tell anyone. I did not show on my first contractual day as a teacher. This also happened to be the same week they had opened the restaurant 26 years earlier, and they ran their annual buffet and dinner special. It was always packed, and they had everyone on deck. The owners were angry I did not show and threatened to fire me if I did not come in. I told them that was fine and said if they did not need anything else, I had a classroom to set up. Then I hung up. That is how they found out I got my first teaching job. I am still friends with the managers. They told me my absence caused a mess because the owners had overbooked and the servers on the floor with me had only recently been hired, and they were counting on me to basically run the service. A lot of meals were comped or given additional discounts due to poor service. They basically lost money the day I did not show. The restaurant closed 3 years later, unrelated to my quitting, but still satisfying to know. Serves them right. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.